March 31, 1970. Japan Airlines Flight 351 leaves Tokyo with 129 passengers. It left Tokyo's Haneda Airport no more than 10 minutes ago and was set to land in Fukuoka in an hour's time, just a regular flight. But soon, at about 7:30 a.m., as the plane was flying over the southern face of Mount Fuji, a young man named Takamaro Tamiya rose from his seat. What he says next changes everything. He's hijacking the plane. Tamiya isn't alone. 8 other young men, most of them university students, follow his lead, revealing samurai swords, pistols, and homemade bombs. The passengers, who moments ago were settling in for a short domestic trip, now find themselves at the mercy of a radical group determined to divert the plane to North Korea. The hijackers are members of the Japanese Red Army, a militant communist faction bent on making a statement to the world. Their original destination, Havana, Cuba, might have been out of reach, but Pyongyang, with its ties to communist ideals, becomes the new target. The pilots are shocked. This was supposed to be a normal flight, but now they're being forced to change course to a country known for its strict and dangerous regime. The passengers sit silently, their hearts racing. They never expected this, a simple flight turning into a terrifying experience. Everyone on board is trapped, unsure of what will happen next. This is not just a hijacking, it's a moment that will change lives and make history. As the plane flies off course, fear takes over. No one knows how this will end, but one thing is certain: Flight 351 will never be forgotten. Japan Airlines Flight 351 took off from Tokyo's Haneda Airport on March 31, 1970, with 122 passengers and 7 crew members. It was an early morning flight, destined for Fukuoka, a routine domestic journey expected to last about an hour. On board were a diverse mix of passengers, business executives, doctors on their way to medical conferences, university students, and even a Roman Catholic priest from New York. The plane was a Boeing 727, designed for short to medium-range flights, making this trip a comfortable and expectedly uneventful one. As the plane ascended, reaching its cruising altitude of 31,000 feet, everything seemed normal. Passengers settled into their seats, some reading newspapers, others dozing off. The flight attendants began their usual duties, serving drinks and snacks. But what the passengers didn't know was that among them were 9 young men with a plan that would soon turn their peaceful flight into a terrifying ordeal. These men, led by 27-year-old Takamaro Tamiya, were members of the Japanese Red Army faction, a radical leftist group. This group was determined to make a political statement by hijacking the plane and diverting it to North Korea. For them, this was not just a hijacking, but a bold act of defiance against the Japanese government, which they saw as an oppressive regime that needed to be overthrown. At 7:30 a.m., just 10 minutes into the flight, and as the plane flew over the majestic southern face of Mount Fuji, Takamaro Tamiya stood up from his seat. With calm and determination, he announced to the cabin that the plane was now under his control. The passengers, initially confused, soon realized the gravity of the situation when Tamiya brandished a samurai sword, a weapon that symbolized both tradition and terror. One by one, the other hijackers revealed themselves. They were young, most of them were university students, some as young as 16, still in high school. They carried with them not only swords but also pistols and homemade bombs. These were no ordinary passengers. They were part of a well-coordinated plan to hijack the plane and fly it to Havana, Cuba, a nation that symbolized communist ideals and revolution. The mood in the cabin quickly shifted from confusion to fear. The passengers, who had moments earlier been enjoying their morning, were now at the mercy of these armed hijackers. The pilots, upon learning of the situation, immediately radioed in for help, reporting the dire circumstances on board. But the hijackers were well prepared. They had studied the plane's layout, knew where the cockpit was, and were ready to take full control of the aircraft. As the hijackers moved through the cabin, they began tying up the male passengers, ensuring that no one would attempt to resist. The sight of these young men, armed and determined, was terrifying. Many of the passengers couldn't understand how such young people could be involved in such a dangerous and radical act. Among the hijackers was a particularly surprising figure, Moriaki Wakabayashi, the bass player of the up-and-coming rock band Hataka no Rarizu. His presence added to the surreal nature of the situation. A musician who had recently been performing on stage was now part of a hijacking, fully committed to the cause of the Japanese Red Army. The pilots, under duress, were forced to comply with the hijackers' demands. However, there was one significant problem that the hijackers had not anticipated. The Boeing 727, being a short to medium-range aircraft, was not equipped to fly across the Pacific Ocean to Cuba, the destination that Tamiya and his comrades had initially planned for. The pilots informed them that the plane simply did not have the fuel capacity to make such a long journey. Realizing that they needed a new plan, the hijackers quickly decided on an alternative destination, North Korea. They saw North Korea, under the rule of Kim Il-sung, as another communist haven where they could find support for their revolutionary cause. The decision to head for Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, was made quickly, but it presented its own set of challenges. The pilots informed the hijackers that they would first need to land in Fukuoka to refuel, as the plane did not have enough fuel to reach North Korea directly. The hijackers agreed, but they made it clear that they would be landing on their terms. At 9 a.m., the plane touched down at Fukuoka Airport. The sight that greeted them was far from ordinary. The airport was surrounded by a large number of police officers, and the media had gathered in anticipation of what was to come. This was the first time Japan had experienced a hijacking, and the entire nation was watching with bated breath. As soon as the plane landed, the hijackers made their demands known. They wanted the plane refueled, and they wanted to release some of the passengers in exchange for safe passage to North Korea. The authorities, led by Vice Minister of Transport Shinjiro Yamamura, were tasked with negotiating the safe release of the passengers. The negotiations were tense. Tamiya, the leader of the hijackers, was adamant that they would kill all the passengers if their demands were not met. The authorities, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to the hijackers' demands to refuel the plane and release 23 passengers. The passengers who were released were primarily women, children, and the elderly, those considered the most vulnerable. As the negotiations continued, the hijackers made it clear that they still intended to fly to North Korea. They believed that by doing so, they could align themselves with the communist regime of Kim Il-sung and continue their revolutionary activities from there. While the plane was being refueled, the authorities began formulating a plan to prevent the hijackers from reaching their destination. They knew that once the plane left Fukuoka, their options for resolving the situation peacefully would be severely limited. As the refueling process was completed, the hijackers prepared for the next phase of their plan. They instructed the pilots to take off and head for Pyongyang. However, the pilots, aware of the authorities' plan, were instructed to delay the takeoff as long as possible. Every minute gained was crucial for the authorities to implement their strategy. As the plane taxied down the runway, the authorities made their move. They had coordinated with the South Korean government to deceive the hijackers into thinking they were flying to Pyongyang, when, in reality, they were being redirected to Gimpo International Airport in Seoul. Once Japan Airlines Flight 351 was airborne again, the hijackers believed they were on their way to Pyongyang. The pilots, under immense pressure, followed the instructions they had been given by the authorities. They tuned into a specific radio frequency, which had been arranged to intercept communications and give the appearance that they were in contact with North Korea air traffic control. As the plane flew over the Tsushima Strait and approached the Korean peninsula, the tension in the cabin remained high. The hijackers, confident in their mission, continued to monitor the situation closely. They were unaware that they were not heading towards North Korea but were instead being guided towards Seoul. As the plane crossed the demilitarized zone DMZ that separates North and South Korea, the pilots received a message from what the hijackers believed was Pyongyang's control tower. The message, delivered in English with a heavy Korean accent, instructed the pilots to continue on their course. In reality, this message was sent by South Korean air traffic control, part of the elaborate ruse designed to trick the hijackers. The situation became even more intense when the plane was approached by fighter jets. The hijackers assumed these were North Korean jets sent to escort them to Pyongyang. In truth, these were South Korean jets, carefully coordinating with the ground control to maintain the deception. The hijackers had no idea that their plan was already starting to unravel. As the plane approached what the hijackers believed to be Pyongyang as it continued on its descent, the hijackers felt a mix of relief and triumph. They believed they were moments away from landing in North Korea, a place they saw as a refuge and ally in their revolutionary struggle. But as the plane drew nearer to the ground, the hijackers noticed something strange. The landscape below didn't look quite like what they had expected from their studies of North Korea. There were familiar signs like the mountainous terrain, but something was off. Despite their suspicions, the hijackers remained confident as the plane touched down on the runway. They were met with what appeared to be a warm welcome: military personnel in uniform, civilians waving North Korean flags, and even a group of young girls singing traditional songs. Everything seemed to align with their expectations, but there was a nagging sense that something wasn't right. As the hijackers prepared to disembark, their leader, Takamaru Tamiya, noticed a few discrepancies. The airport, while draped in North Korean symbols, didn't fully match the descriptions they had studied. The uniforms of the soldiers, while similar, had minor differences from what they had seen in photographs. The hijackers, however, dismissed these concerns, eager to meet their supposed allies and begin the next phase of their mission. As they exited the plane, they were greeted by a man dressed as a high-ranking North Korean official. He spoke to them in heavily accented Korean, welcoming them to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and praising their revolutionary spirit. The hijackers, still unaware of the deception, followed the man as he led them away from the plane. What they didn't know was that they had landed not in Pyongyang but at Gimpo International Airport in Seoul, South Korea. The South Korean authorities, in collaboration with Japanese officials and the CIA, had orchestrated an elaborate ruse to convince the hijackers they had arrived in North Korea. The fake uniforms, the doctored signage, and the staged welcoming ceremony were all part of this deception. As the hijackers were led further away from the plane, the authorities sprang into action. The remaining passengers and crew were quickly evacuated, and the airport was secured. The hijackers, realizing too late that they had been deceived, attempted to fight back but were swiftly overpowered by the waiting security forces. Tamiya and his comrades were taken into custody, their dreams of a grand revolutionary statement shattered by the cunning and resourcefulness of the authorities. With the hijackers in custody and the hostages safely rescued, the immediate crisis of Japan Airlines Flight 351 was over. However, the events of that day left a lasting impact on Japan and the world. The hijacking had exposed vulnerabilities in airline security and highlighted the lengths to which radical groups were willing to go to achieve their goals. In the days following the hijacking, the Japanese government faced intense scrutiny. Questions were raised about how such a large group of armed men had been able to board a plane undetected. The public demanded answers, and the government responded by implementing stricter security measures at airports across the country. Metal detectors and baggage checks, which were not yet standard at the time, became mandatory, and efforts to prevent future hijackings were significantly ramped up. The hijackers themselves became a topic of intense media coverage. Takamaru Tamiya and his comrades were tried in a highly publicized court case. They were sentenced to long prison terms, their radical dreams dashed by the reality of their failed mission. Moriaki Wakabayashi, the bass player who had shocked the nation with his involvement, became a symbol of the disillusionment and radicalization that had affected some segments of Japan's youth during that era. Internationally, the hijacking of Flight 351 drew attention to the growing threat of politically motivated hijackings. Other countries took note of the vulnerabilities that had been exposed and began to strengthen their own aviation security measures. The incident also highlighted the importance of international cooperation in dealing with such threats, as seen in the collaboration between Japan, South Korea, and the United States in bringing the situation to a peaceful resolution. In the years that followed, the Japanese Red Army continued to carry out terrorist activities, both in Japan and abroad. However, the failure of the Flight 351 hijacking marked a significant blow to their movement. It demonstrated the limitations of their methods and the challenges they faced in trying to incite a broader revolution. The hijacking of Japan Airlines Flight 351 remains one of the most infamous incidents in aviation history. It serves as a reminder of the dangers posed by extremist ideologies and the importance of vigilance in ensuring the safety of air travel. The story of the young men who attempted to hijack the plane and the passengers and crew who endured the ordeal continues to be told as a cautionary tale, highlighting the thin line between ordinary life and the unthinkable.